All right, moving on now, we're going to continue our white blood cell story and talk a little bit about your agranulocytes. Agranulocyte, again, that prefix A generally refers to without something when you see that in biology. And so these cells, when you look in their cytoplasms, you don't see the super pronounced spots. Or now you might see some, but you're not going to see as many as you would with a neutrophil or an eosinophil or a basophil. You have two types. These include your lymphocytes. Here's an example lymphocyte over here. With a lymphocyte, notice that big dark purple spot there, the circle, that's the nucleus of the lymphocyte. So it actually occupies most of the space inside that cell, and it just has a little thin area of cytoplasm around the edges. And these are also a lot of times not much bigger than your red blood cells. And then over here is a monocyte. Monocytes are the other type of agranulocyte. They're much bigger than a lymphocyte. The nucleus often looks like a kidney in terms of its shape, or a horseshoe in some instances. And there's the cytoplasm. With the typical stains that are used on these blood cells, a lot of times the cytoplasm looks kind of sky blue like you see there. And you can see there are some spots in the cytoplasm, but they're not nearly as pronounced as what you would see with granulocytes. All right, your lymphocytes. Your lymphocytes are, after the neutrophils, they're your second most numerous type of white blood cell. And again, you really don't see much of the cytoplasm when you look at a lymphocyte under the microscope. You mainly see the big circular nucleus in the center and a little sliver of cytoplasm around the edges. All right, so even though you see lymphocytes in your blood on a blood smear, if you were looking at that under the microscope, the lymphocytes are mostly just traveling through the blood to other locations in the body where they tend to hang out, and they guard for invasion of your body by microorganisms. So they mainly hang out in lymphoid tissues, which we'll study in more detail when we cover the lymphatic system in Unit 3. But your lymphoid tissues include things like your lymph nodes, like the ones up here in your neck. Your spleen is actually considered to be a lymphoid organ. So you have lymphocytes in your spleen. And you've got some other places like your tonsils are little patches where these types of cells will hang out. And you've got some little patches of tissues in places like your lower respiratory tract and your intestinal tract where these cells like to hang out as well. These lymphocytes are crucial to immunity, including immune memory. So like when you get exposed to a particular strain of influenza virus, and then that protects you toward that particular strain for a long period of time afterwards. That's immune memory. These types of cells play a very crucial role in that. Lymphocytes, you have two major categories: T lymphocytes, or T cells, and your B lymphocytes, or your B cells. And as we'll see, we'll cover these in more detail in Unit 3. Your T cells are good at, some of them, what they do is they attack cells in your body that have viruses inside them. They attack tumor cells, so your immune system does help you fight cancerous tumors, and benign tumors as well. Benign tumors are ones that are not cancerous. And then you have some T cells more or less function as the grand conductors of your immune system. They send signals out, chemical signals, that kind of coordinate the processes of your immune system. And again, we'll see a little bit more of that in Unit 3. The B lymphocytes, or the B cells, these are the cells that eventually, when they get activated, produce antibodies. Antibodies are protein weapons, basically. Come on, stylus right. Antibodies are proteins. If you can read that on the screen, these are protein weapons that are very specific about what they attach to. And so your immune system, these B cells become activated. They turn into another type of cell called a plasma cell. And plasma cells crank out lots and lots and lots of these antibody weapons that help you fight very specific infections. Like you will make antibodies against a particular strain of influenza or antibodies against salmonella bacteria, things like that. They're very specific about what they attack. All right, then your monocytes. Now these are, when you're looking at these under the microscope, they're typically the largest of your leukocytes. The cytoplasm is usually pale blue. Now it depends on what type of stain they use, but the typical, what they call a Wright stain, the cytoplasm comes out pale blue. The nucleus has a U, kidney shape, U shape, horseshoe shape to it. And again, we've talked about this before. These cells, they leave the blood vessels, they get into your tissues. Monocytes become macrophages or wandering macrophages. So they wander around, they're very phagocytic, and they look for things like viruses and bacteria and damaged tissues. They'll clean up your own cells, things like your old worn out red blood cells that we've talked about before, or you know, if you have a burn or a tissue injury, you've got lots of your own cells that are dead. Those need to be ingested and broken apart, and important molecules recycled if possible. And so generally it's your macrophages that do those types of processes. The macrophages also, when we'll cover this more when we get into Unit 3, they help activate your lymphocytes. They detect infections, and they tell the lymphocytes, hey, it's time to ramp up and do your job here and help fight off this infectious organism that has invaded the body. Okay, here's a pretty nice image. This is an image that's made with a very powerful type of microscope called an electron microscope. And so you can wind up with these really cool, highly magnified 3D type images that are made with these microscopes. But here are a couple of macrophages here, and they send out these long appendages. Those are called pseudopods. Pseudopod means false foot. Pseudo means false. Pod, like a podiatrist, is a foot doctor. So whoever first saw these under the microscope thought they looked like a foot or an appendage. So they send those out, and they're very good at attaching to things like bacteria, and then they'll ingest those inside those little phagosome compartments, and then digest them with digestive enzymes. All right, so we've finished our little overview of the different types of leukocytes or white blood cells. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about a few leukocyte disorders that you should be familiar with, including leukemia.